No. That is the understandable knee-jerk reaction, at least, but I'd like to offer some different points of view. For those that haven't seen BlizzCon 2017, which recently ended, we're finally getting an official vanilla World of Warcraft server option, certainly the biggest surprise this BlizzCon, and we haven't yet been given any specifics. Other than that, they want to reproduce the game experience that we all enjoyed from the original classic WoW. But in that, I think, lies the key, the general game experience. But you might ask yourself, why do people want this in the first place, and isn't it just nostalgia? While I don't want to entirely dedicate a second video to explaining the redeeming qualities of such an old MMO, I'd highly recommend those on the fence to check out my previous one on the subject. It is important to realize that people are looking at this for very different reasons, and nailing down what exactly made Vanilla WoW isn't easy, and something Blizzard will obviously have to ask themselves as they move forward with this project. This, however, brings me to my first of two statements that I'd like to present, and before I continue, I want to make it clear that in the end, I'm quite fine with whatever they end up choosing. I'm just excited for an actual classic server option. But here it is. Vanilla World of Warcraft is impossible. This is a statement that I ended up with after quite a few conversations with people looking at this with a very strong purist point of view, mostly promoting the concept of not wanting their memories of the game altered. And again, people want very different things from this. Neither their opinions nor my statements here are something I claim to necessarily be right or wrong, but I do think an entirely purist point of view is inherently flawed. "That's vanilla" is a phrase that I fear will be used a lot in the upcoming months as we debate about what should happen to World of Warcraft Classic, and I say fear because I think it's inherently pointless to take such a stance. For starters, the original game came out in 2004 with the release version called 1.1. The very last major patch that World of Warcraft Vanilla received was at the end of September in 2006, called 1.12.1. Followed by a brief client bug fix in the form of 1.12.2, but that aside. We're looking at roughly 2 years in which new content was added, but more relevant to this specific point, a lot of content was changed. 1.12 introduced major rogue changes, and interestingly, it also introduced cross-realm battlegrounds. Now, the idea of cross-realm is something that most of us can agree on was not the right move in preserving the core vanilla experience, and so already I have no doubt that Blizzard won't faithfully implement that specific patch element, but there's more to this. 1.1 to 1.12 is a range of 12 entirely different stages in vanilla World of Warcraft, and when I say entirely, I do mean radical changes. There were numerous class changes throughout, including entire revamps. If you go back to, say, 1.3, you had different UI elements missing from the game, you didn't have party questlog sharing, you had a lot of older item models and textures, and numerous different balance elements like gaining extra attacks affected swing timers, something that severely impacts DPS, or the druid class not being able to shapeshift out of polymorph effects, a major PvP balance change. Going back further to 1.2, ability training costs were far worse, mobs had far worse line of sight issues, skill up rates for ranged weapons were a lot slower, spell targeting was a lot worse in PvP if an enemy happened to move, you could escape combat with a warlock summon, and the game didn't properly differentiate between dodges, blocks or parries, and just called everything a miss, at least at a UI level. The point is, if you took a player from 2004 and showed them 1.12, it would be a very different game. That's vanilla. Which one is vanilla? Is it the immensely flawed 1.1? Is it 1.7 back before druids? Or something as general as instant attacks got a major change? Or is it simply the last one, 1.12? If you're looking purely at this from a I want to relive my memories exactly purist point of view, I highly doubt that's possible if just from a patch standpoint. Not to mention the immense changes that the general community has undergone throughout that time. After all, looking at private servers, which mostly run on 1.12, practically every talent build or possibility has been theory crafted to the max, or things like Alterac Valley, which are rightfully in the minds of many as day-long spanning battlegrounds, can be won in less than 30 minutes due to rush tactics that people now know and didn't as universally back then. And private servers have of course been largely unable to create that authentic experience entirely because they're not going to demand their player base to download entirely different versions every time. Which offers up the question, would Blizzard put people through that most authentic experience of every single patch? In that case, some people might be waiting years to receive that one patch change they fondly remember as part of their vanilla experience. And hey, there's also the question of whether it'll truly be an authentic vanilla World of Warcraft experience without the hovering corpses that used to spam gold seller sites. The point is this: that's vanilla, 100% pure memory is in all likelihood an unobtainable dream. Which brings me to my second, far more controversial statement, I'm sure: World of Warcraft Classic should make changes. I would argue that vanilla World of Warcraft isn't about that one annoying bug or useful exploit you used to have. It's certainly not, to me, about any memories in which I couldn't auto-loot whenever I killed something, nor is it, to me, about over half of the class specs being incredibly subpar, if not straight up worthless. In the case of auto-loot or map coordinates and quest objective markers being present, this is in all likelihood going to get addressed by add-ons anyway, which most people will consider mandatory, but in this case that personal opt-in or opt-out that add-ons allow will likely do the trick without putting any pressure on Blizzard to change anything mechanically. But what was vanilla, I'd argue, is a general game design philosophy surrounding community building and frankly tedious mechanics that served as a social catalyst for the title. Feeling proud after learning the layout of Meridon or Sunken Temple and enjoying the struggle therein. The fact that it took months to get to level 60 with an average of 15.5 days accumulated playtime back in the day. All content having a use to at least some degree, with guilds doing Molten Core to Naxxramas throughout pretty much the entirety of it. MMOs, generally, are ultimately Skinner boxes, and the actual Skinner box itself is not why people used to play vanilla WoW. It's everything that developed around it. That immense delayed gratification and feeling some sense of achievement after only hitting level 30, or spending hours getting dungeon groups together, but truly having a social experience when you successfully made your way to them and hopefully through them. The game heavily inconvenienced the player and forced them to interact with others to achieve their goals. And again, I'll reiterate that these positives are different from person to person. Perhaps you simply liked vanilla because there was no phasing system in place, meaning players didn't suddenly vanish out of sight and ruined your immersion. Perhaps you simply prefer the lack of visual pollution from giant mounts, flying or otherwise, that most MMOs nowadays employ. You like that epic items truly are exceedingly rare. Perhaps having to go on a lengthy journey to travel around the world everywhere, including boat rides to specific places, created a sense of exploration and world building for you that the modern MMOs simply don't have. Or perhaps, like me, the main reason you'd be so excited for a return to vanilla WoW is because it didn't have cross-realm mechanics and dungeon finders with instant teleportation that, in my eyes, have been the single largest contributor to creating this single-player MMO that modern ones tend to end up as. But does auto-looting really factor into this? Yes, it's a quality of life upgrade, and by going too far with these is how we ended up with modern WoW to begin with, which many people enjoy, but that's clearly not what classic WoW should be aiming for. How about the immensely slow mob spawn timers? After all, some can easily take up to 30 minutes to respawn, which frankly was not an original design goal of Blizzard when they made vanilla WoW, but rather a result of far more people than assumed playing their game. Should that really stay as it is, even though it doesn't really seem to contribute much to the general experience of vanilla? Well, the one thing that I've been mainly pondering about is class balance. To begin with, it was obviously not intended by Blizzard to have so many specs be so incredibly subpar. In reality, some of them might as well be removed and have little to no impact in how people play or experience the game. Especially because, as I mentioned before, specs varied in whether or not they were viable to begin with, depending on which version of vanilla you ended up with, and as it seems unlikely that they'll slowly roll out every single patch like they have in the past, not everyone is going to get the balance they'd so fondly or negatively remember. And let's keep in mind, 1.12 wasn't perfect by a long stretch either. It wasn't done or finished. Balance was still an ongoing issue, and just because they addressed the next couple of changes in the patches for the Burning Crusade, doesn't mean, if you ask me, that those concepts should be completely tossed aside in favor of a more pure experience. Certainly, the developers didn't always manage to nail their original design goals, and veered off in different directions too. Is it really helpful for the overall experience that feral druids are more or less worthless once you're done leveling, and almost every single druid will end up pigeonholed into being a healer? Should hybrid classes stay that way, despite that they weren't really successful in being hybrids, and rather from a PvE perspective were almost solely healers? Rat paladins might as well not exist in vanilla from what I remember, Most people leveled mainly with an odd combination of protection talents, and besides the incredibly rare snowflakes, all of them were forced to be healers, generally in cloth gear, when they hit 60. This is of course a really dangerous thing to mess with. Class balance impacts the experience a lot, and likewise I think it'll be one of the biggest elements that'll influence World of Warcraft Classic's lifespan. But I don't think they need to be drastic in order to drastically improve the general spec's viabilities, and in turn allow for more freedom and options to players. Druids, for instance, were mainly an itemization and scaling issue looking at level 60. They don't need new abilities or talents, they could be made significantly better by relatively simple stat formula changes on their end, or at the very least giving them useful tier sets. Shadow Priests got hit hard by debuff limitations in which multiple would override one another, or Mindflay I believe couldn't be stacked, resulting in having more than one Shadow Priest being entirely worthless. The chance of you being that single Shadow Priest is of course incredibly low, despite that I'm sure many people would love to play one. It is a hard pill to swallow when you're then spending months and months solely as a healer. I understand entirely that the thought of touching these will set off alarm bells to many diehard vanilla fans, but I think it's important to discuss these possibilities all the same, especially because they are so impactful in terms of keeping a healthy player base. I do not believe that the core values of vanilla resulted from only having warrior tanks or ignoring elemental and enhancement shamans' existence outside of PvP. So the main question is, what will Blizzard do and how do you think they should handle it? Looking at a successful MMO that has already done legacy servers, namely old school RuneScape, I think there's a great example here to look towards. In this case, they apply a poll that the entire community can vote on, in which they suggest possible changes to the game. Providing over 75% of people agree, it is then implemented. Despite that, undoubtedly many hardcore classic RuneScape fans had a very similar purist point of view initially. It seems to have worked out well for them, resulting in a thriving legacy experience. And that is really the main point I'm trying to drive home here. I hope that in the coming months we can all rationally debate about what should and shouldn't be included in World of Warcraft Classic, and realize that the 100% pure vanilla experience is impossible to achieve. I'd love to see them take that 2007 RuneScape route of iterating from one point, rebalancing and updating as the community sees fit, but of course we can only wait and see. May the best arguments win, and may we end up with a lovely official legacy experience that many of us have wanted to play for so long. Thank you for watching, my name is Ben Haas, and I'll see you in the next video.